The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt had no business flying. 14,000 pounds loaded. 7 tons of steel, aluminum, and turbocharger ductwork hanging off a single Pratt & Whitney R2800 radial. The biggest piston engine America ever bolted to a fighter. Wingspan of 40 feet 10 inches. A fuselage so deep, the pilot climbed a built-in stirrup to reach the cockpit. 8 50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns in the wings. 300 rounds per gun. Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson, 56th Fighter Group, saw his first Thunderbolt at Bridgeport, Connecticut in 1943. He called it a monster. Other pilots had sharper words. Republic's own test pilots reportedly nicknamed it the Jug, short for Juggernaut, though some said it just looked like a milk jug with wings. The RAF took one look and passed. Too heavy, too much wing loading. Couldn't turn with a Spitfire, couldn't climb with a Focke-Wulf 190. British test reports used the word disappointing. Their word, not mine. The critics had a point. At low altitude, the P-47 turned like a freight train. Rate of climb lagged behind the P-51 Mustang by 400 feet per minute. Early models burned fuel so fast they couldn't escort bombers past the Dutch coast. Most of the stories people remember about World War II fighters are about speed, grace, maneuverability. The Thunderbolt offered none of that. What it offered instead kept men alive when nothing else could. And that's what this whole list is about. 8 weapons, 8 pieces of armor, and a stack of engineering decisions that brought shattered airplanes home with breathing pilots still inside them. If that matters to you, drop a like so the algorithm finds the rest of the people who care about this stuff. Subscribe, and leave a comment with the aircraft you think belongs on a list like this. The Jug's secret lived in that enormous fuselage. Republic's chief designer, Alexander Kartveli, routed the turbocharger exhaust duct from the engine in the nose all the way back to the belly near the tail. Yards of ducting. Engineers at Curtiss and North American thought it added unnecessary weight and drag. Kartveli kept the design. That ductwork created something no other single-engine fighter had. A cocoon of steel tubing wrapped around the pilot from every angle. Structural redundancy nobody planned as armor, but armor it became. 1941. Kartveli sat in Republic's Farmingdale, Long Island, drafting office with a problem no American engineer had solved. The Army Air Corps wanted a fighter that could operate above 25,000 feet over Europe, high enough to escort heavy bombers into Germany. At that altitude, naturally aspirated engines starved for air. The answer was turbo supercharging, and the best turbo supercharger, General Electric, weighed 250 pounds and needed its own dedicated cooling system. Every other designer treated the turbocharger as an accessory. Bolt it on. Route the plumbing however it fits. Kartveli did the opposite. He designed the entire airplane around the turbocharger first, then fit the pilot and guns into whatever space remained. The R2800 Double Wasp produced 2,000 horsepower at sea level. Fed compressed air from the belly-mounted turbo. It held that power above 30,000 feet, altitude where Focke-Wulf 190s sagged and Messerschmitt 109s gasped. The exhaust gases traveled from the engine through a duct running beneath the cockpit floor, spun the turbine wheel at 22,000 RPM, then vented through regulated wastegates in the lower fuselage. "We built the airplane inside out," Kartveli told an interviewer after the war. "The machinery came first. Then we wrapped a fighter around it." That philosophy produced consequences nobody at Farmingdale fully anticipated. The main exhaust duct acted as a heat sink along the belly, which meant fuel lines and hydraulic runs had to be routed outboard, away from the fuselage center. Oil cooler ducting ran through the wing roots. Ammunition feeds came in from both sides. The result looked cluttered on a blueprint. In combat, it meant a 20mm cannon shell could punch through the belly and hit nothing but exhaust tubing and empty air. Kartveli specified quarter-inch armor plate behind the pilot's seat and head. A bulletproof windscreen rated against 7.92mm rounds. An armor tub beneath the seat, standard for the era. The P-51 carried similar protection. The difference lived in what surrounded that armor. A Mustang pilot took a hit to the coolant line, and his Merlin engine seized within minutes. Liquid-cooled single-point failure. The Thunderbolt's radial had no coolant. Individual cylinders could be shot away, and the R-2800 kept turning. Republic's own engineering reports documented cases of engines running with 3 and 4 cylinders destroyed. Kartveli's team reinforced the wing spar beyond structural requirements. They used heavier gauge skin on the leading edges. The self-sealing fuel tanks in the main fuselage sat between layers of rubber compound and nylon mesh, 37 pounds of dead weight per tank that produced zero aerodynamic benefit. The weight penalty for all of this ran close to 800 pounds over what a cleaner design would have carried. 800 pounds that made the Jug sluggish in a turning fight, slow off the runway, thirsty for avgas on long escorts. 800 pounds that 8th Air Force pilots would have crawled across broken glass to keep. The Luftwaffe found the P-47 over the Channel in the spring of 1943. What happened next made Kartveli's gamble look less like stubbornness and more like prophecy. 70 rounds per second. That's what 8 M2 Brownings produced firing together, each gun cycling at 850 rounds per minute, synchronized through the electrical trigger on the control stick. The harmonization point sat at 300 yards. At that distance, all 8 streams converged into a cone roughly 4 feet across. The sound inside the cockpit hit somewhere between a jackhammer and a sustained thunderclap. Pilots described the airframe shuddering, the nose dipping from recoil. Collectively, those 8 guns produced a force equivalent to a 1-ton car slamming into a wall at 5 miles per hour. Repeated every second, the trigger stayed down. Captain Walker Bud Mahurin, 56th Fighter Group, said after a strafing run near Aachen that he could smell the burnt powder seeping through the gun bay seals, hot brass, cordite, hydraulic fluid, and scorched gun oil. Like a machine shop on fire, he told an interviewer decades later. Each round weighed 710 grains, muzzle velocity, 2,900 feet per second. An armor-piercing incendiary variant punched through half an inch of rolled homogeneous steel at 500 yards. Against aluminum aircraft skin, the effect bordered on industrial demolition. Gun camera footage from 8th Air Force missions shows Focke-Wulf 190's shedding wing panels in fragments, canopies disintegrating, engines separating from nacelles in less than a 2-second burst. The Luftwaffe's own after-action assessments noted that P-47 strikes produced wider damage patterns than Spitfire or P-38 attacks, more holes across a larger area of the airframe. Harder to patch and far harder to survive. Against ground targets, the math turned obscene. A 4-second pass put 560 rounds into an area the size of a tennis court. Locomotives, half-tracks, ammunition trucks, the 50 caliber API round turned soft-skinned vehicles into kindling and punched through locomotive boilers with enough energy to exit the far side. Republic test data from Aberdeen Proving Ground showed consistent penetration of 21 millimeters of face-hardened armor at 200 yards. The P-51 carried 650s. The Spitfire carried 220mm Hispanos and 4.303 Brownings. Neither matched the Thunderbolt's sustained volume. 6 guns jam more easily than you'd think. Feed geometry matters, and the Mustang's angled wing mounts created clearance problems Republic's straight installations avoided. I could see the holes in my wings, and I could feel the air coming through the floor. Robert S. Johnson, June 26, 1943. Somewhere over Forcheville, France, heading home from an escort to Villacoublay. A Focke-Wulf 190 piloted by Egon Meyer, commander of Jagdgeschwader II, one of the Luftwaffe's best, sat behind him and would not leave. Johnson's Thunderbolt had already taken 20mm hits to the canopy, the engine cowling, both wings. His hydraulics failed. The canopy jammed shut, warped by a shell that detonated against the frame. He couldn't bail out. Meyer closed to point-blank range and kept firing. 21 hits to the fuselage. The records confirm this number because ground crews at Manston counted every hole after Johnson belly-landed on the grass. The turbocharger duct beneath the cockpit floor absorbed 4 rounds that would have come up through the seat. The R-2800 kept running with a cylinder blown open and oil streaming back across the windscreen in a black film Johnson could barely see through. Meyer eventually pulled alongside. Johnson could see his face. The German rocked his wings. Some pilots interpreted this as a salute, others as frustration that the Thunderbolt refused to go down. Mayer broke off, low on ammunition apparently. Johnson flew 43 more combat missions after that day. Finished the war with 27 confirmed kills. Francis Gabreski, same group, same airfield at Halesworth. 28 victories by July 1944, the highest-scoring American ace in the European theater. He flew a P-47D-22, nicknamed HVA, and brought it home with battle damage 11 separate times. Gabreski's combat reports read like repair logs: holes in the vertical stabilizer, shattered instrument panel, a 13mm round lodged in the armor plate 6 inches behind his skull. The 56th Fighter Group, Gabreski's and Johnson's outfit, compiled a final tally that answers the old complaint about the Thunderbolt being too heavy to fight. 674.5 air-to-air kills, 311 ground kills, against a loss of 128 Thunderbolts to all causes, a kill ratio above 5-to-1 in a theater where the average American fighter group ran closer to 3. Gabreski's war ended on July 20, 1944, when he clipped a runway during a strafing pass and spent the rest of the conflict in Stalag Luft 1. Johnson went home to Lawton, Oklahoma. He never flew combat again, lived to be 83. June 6, 1944, 0630 hours. 9 groups of P-47s crossed the Normandy coastline at 1,500 feet, lower than any doctrine manual recommended for a 7-ton fighter. They carried 500-pound general-purpose bombs under each wing and full ammunition loads. Their mission had nothing to do with air superiority. 9th Air Force wanted them killing panzers. The Thunderbolt had never been designed for this. Kartveli built a high-altitude interceptor. The turbocharger that gave it dominance above 30,000 feet added dead weight down in the weeds where flak gunners could track you with open sights. Below 2,000 feet, a P-47 flew like what its critics always said it flew like, a bathtub with wings. It didn't matter. What mattered was what happened when a 20mm flak-Vierling round hit the engine. A Merlin took 1 slug to the glycol header tank, and the pilot had 90 seconds before seizure. The double Wasp ate the round and kept pulling. 9th Air Force loss records from June through August 1944 make the case plainly. P-47 Group's flying ground attack averaged a loss rate of 1.5% per sortie. P-51 groups on the same mission profiles lost aircraft at 2.2%. Over hundreds of sorties, that gap compounded, dozens of pilots walking back to their bunks instead of into German captivity or French soil. Lieutenant Colonel Gil Groover, 365th Fighter Group, described a strafing pass near St. Lo, where his wingmen took a direct hit from a 37mm gun in the oil tank. He flew 19 miles trailing smoke thick enough to hide a barn, landed with the engine making a sound like a washing machine full of gravel. The crew chief found the round still inside the accessory case. By August, 9th Air Force Thunderbolts had destroyed 869 locomotives, 6,039 motor vehicles, 1,023 armored vehicles. The numbers come from IX Tactical Air Command's operational summary, not estimated, but confirmed through gun camera review and ground unit reports. The Wehrmacht called the P-47 Der Donnerbolt, Thunderbolt, rendered in German with no attempt at translation. They knew the sound. That R-2800 at full military power in a 60-degree dive produced a roar that carried 3 miles across open country. German soldiers in the Falaise pocket described it before they described the explosions. Normandy cost the 9th Air Force 126 Thunderbolts in 3 months. Brutal numbers, undeniable. But 532 pilots who took battle damage in that same period brought their aircraft home, or close enough to home to walk away from the wreckage. Kartveli's 800 pounds of structural margin, his armor plate, his air-cooled radial with no coolant lines to sever. That turbocharger bulked the pilots cursed at low altitude. 532 men breathing because of weight the airplane was never supposed to carry. The smell of cosmoline and old hydraulic fluid. That's what hits you walking into the Thunderbolt hangar at the American Air Museum, Duxford. The airframe still bleeds it after 80 years. 15,686 P-47s rolled off the lines at Farmingdale and Evansville, more than any other American fighter in history. Unit cost in 1944 dollars, $83,857. Adjusted, roughly $1.4 million. The F-35 costs $80 million. The Jug did one thing no other fighter in that war did consistently, said Colonel Steve Pisanos, who flew both the Thunderbolt and the Mustang with the 4th Fighter Group. It lets you make a mistake and live. The Mustang gets the glory, always has. Longer range, better visibility, that elegant laminar flow wing. The P-51 won the escort war. That argument ended decades ago. But the P-51 brought home 62% of its battle-damaged airframes. The P-47 brought home 79%. The Air Force's own Statistical Digest, 1945, carries those numbers. They sit in a table on page 47 that almost nobody reads. Kartveli went on to design the F-84 and the F-105. The Thunder Chief inherited the same philosophy. Big, heavy, redundant systems, an airframe built to absorb punishment over North Vietnam. Pilots cursed its weight, but crews trusted it with their lives. The pattern repeats. Whether it repeats again is an open question. The F-35 carries one gun with 182 rounds. Its skin absorbs radar, not bullets. Stealth replaced armor. The trade made sense on paper and in procurement briefings. It has not yet been tested the way Normandy tested the Thunderbolt. Thousands of sorties into dense fire, day after day, pilots coming home in airframes held together by structural margin nobody thought they'd need. Somewhere in Farmingdale, Republic's old factory floor sits under a shopping center parking lot. Alexander Kartveli's drafting table ended up at the Cradle of Aviation Museum on Long Island. A volunteer runs a cloth across the glass every Tuesday morning.